So happy to see the standing ovations are back. Makes the speakers feel good. Really happy to be here with you all. CMX Summit always feels like a homecoming, and seeing faces that come back every year since 2014. I counted today, don't quote me on this. I think this is our 14th conference, which is pretty wild. Before I dive into my talk, I did want to take a moment to just acknowledge some of the conversations that are happening in this community. There's people who have not always felt included in this community and who have experienced harm in this community. And today, I am not the leader of CMX. Beth is leading the charge, but I am responsible for those years where I did lead CMX. And I just want to acknowledge those people and say that I'm here to have the hard conversations, and I don't know what the next steps are, but I care very deeply about this community, this industry, and every one of you in it. And I'm here. I'm here to make it better. I'm here to help move it in a better direction and make this community better. So come talk to me. Anybody who ever wants to talk to me, come talk to me. Let's have the easy conversations, let's have the hard conversations, and let's try to make this space better, because we all love it. We do this work because we're really passionate about it, and it's important that we have these conversations. So I just want to say that first before I dive in. All right, Serendipity. So I'm going to start by telling you a story about how I met my wife. And so my wife and I met in college in 2005. Yeah, a long time ago. And so the first time I saw her, she was standing outside of the library, this library. And I was walking by. I remember what she was wearing. She had totally ripped up jeans with marker all over it. She was wearing an AFI hoodie, just my type. And we're walking by, and I was walking with my friend Matt, and he says hi to her, and she says hi back. And I was just like, who is that? She is beautiful. He's like, oh, that's Allison. She's in my math class. And so, of course, a couple of weeks go by, and he runs into her at a frat party, and he goes up to her and says, my friend Spinks has a crush on you. To which she responded, who the fuck is Spinks? And so we found each other on AIM, as one did back then. She was drowning in U with 3 U's. Middle one was uppercase. I was System of a Spinks. Yep. Great icebreaker, by the way, for this event. Ask people what their AIM names were. And so began our relationship. And like a lot of relationships in college, it had its ups and downs. It wasn't always very smooth. You know, I was like in love with her, and she was like, about me. And then she fell in love with me, and I was like, but I'm kind of getting over you. And then we got to senior year, and she was coming back from studying abroad. She went to Paris. And she came back to school being like, all right, new chapter. I'm moving on from this relationship. You know, I'm moving on. And of course, I came back to school being like, I think I'm ready to commit. And so it was like 2 weeks into school, and I was sitting in my room in the frat house. I was a frat boy, judge me. And I'm sitting in the window, and I see her walking by with a couple friends. And it was like a pretty random street we lived on, not like you wouldn't expect to see her there. And I was like, holy shit, it's Allison. So I yell, Allison! And she ignores me. And so I yell louder. Maybe she didn't hear me. Allison! She heard me that time, ignored me. But I knew her weakness, which are cats. And my roommate that year decided to adopt a kitten, which terrible idea in a frat house, but nonetheless, I had a kitten handy. And so I grabbed the kitten, whose name was Wheezy, and I was like Rafiki in The Lion King, like holding the kitten out the window. I'm like, Allison, look! And so she looks up and sees the cat and just runs into the house. And we just hung out and started talking, and like we just were finally, after all those years of ups and downs, felt like we were like really connecting again, and we like just quickly became really close friends again. And then by November of that year, we were together again. And whenever I think of the topic of serendipity, I always think of that story and how it's really about this like magical moment, this completely unexpected series of events that have to come together for something to occur, right? Like we have to go to the same school in the first place. I had to be walking with a friend who knew her. We both had to have goth AIM names. We didn't really have to have that, but it still helped. And then like for her to be walking down the street that day, for me to have a kitten handy, like I actually think if I didn't see her that day and I didn't have Wheezy, our kitten, she might have just walked by, continuing with that mindset of moving on, and we never would have had that opportunity to reconnect, and like we might not be together today. Happily married, 2 kids, like absolutely in love. And so what are the odds, right, that we have these close encounters and we don't always necessarily follow up on them? And so as I started to research serendipity more and more, I realized it's kind of a part of everything. So I want everyone real quick to just think about one person who's really meaningful in your life that's not a family member. Could be from your past, someone you're really close with now. And then I want you to think about like what were the set of circumstances that had to come together for you to form your relationship with that person. Did you have to be in the right time, the right place, the right context? All right, now by show of hands, if you feel like it was serendipitous that you came together with this person, you feel that sense of serendipity, raise your hand. That's every hand in the room, except the people on their phones. So like that, I mean, like how wild is that? Like when you realize that serendipity is such a core part of what it is to be a human in community, in relationships. And as I think about building community, and this is what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to create this environment where people are likely to cross paths with the right person or the right information or the right idea at the right time. And when that happens and you have that positive outcome, it feels like magic, right? And if we could do that over and over again, we're gonna have a really powerful community. And so it begged this question of how do you engineer serendipity? It's a term that's talked about a lot in the community industry. We talk about engineering serendipity, and I got really curious about that. Like, can you actually engineer it? Can you increase the odds that serendipity is likely to occur? And so I started doing a lot of research on it. And I'm going to share a little bit about what I found with you. So the first thing I dove into was I found a study that was called Investigating Serendipity, How It Unfolds and What May Influence It, by Laurie McKay-Peat and Elaine Toms. And so what I discovered from this is what they call the serendipity process. All right? So there's 4 steps for serendipity to occur. Number 1, you need a trigger, some cue, crossing paths with somebody, watching a talk, consuming information, coming up with an idea. Some sort of trigger has to spark the experience. That's number 1. Number 2 is there has to be a connection. So you can't just see the trigger, you have to connect it to some sort of valuable outcome. Maybe it's an emotional connection, like it was for me and my wife. It could be there's an opportunity here to partner with somebody, become friends with them, to work on an idea together. You have to connect it to something that makes it worth pursuing, which then brings us to the next step, which is the follow-up. So you get the trigger, you connect it to a possible outcome, you have to take an action to follow up. You have to talk to the person, you have to follow up on text, you have to set up that next meeting, you have to set up that date, you have to ask them, you have to approach the stranger, right? You have to take some action. And then the 4th one is a valuable outcome, which this was really interesting to me because I think before I started doing this research, I perceived serendipity as just like a chance occurrence. But it's really interesting that it actually has to be positive for us to consider something serendipitous. Like you wouldn't ever say, I was serendipitously hit by a car. Right? You never say that. So it has to have a positive outcome. And this is also interesting because it means that we only perceive serendipity when we look backwards. We don't know it in the moment as we're experiencing it. It's only after we get that positive outcome and then we look at all those circumstances that came together to lead us to that positive outcome that we consider it to be serendipitous. And then there's a final element, which is called what they called an unexpected thread. So at each step, from the trigger to the connection to the follow-up and the valuable outcome, there needs to be a feeling of unexpectedness. And this is interesting for community builders because, as I'll talk about later, a lot of what we do is facilitate. We almost want them to expect to come and like make friends and connections. But the more unexpected it is, the more they're going to feel like it was like magic, like serendipitous, like the universe brought them together. And so that's the process that serendipity goes through, right? We have the trigger, connection, follow-up, valuable outcome, and the unexpected thread throughout, and that creates a perception of serendipity. Cool, so we know what the process is and how someone gets to serendipity. The next question I had was, well, how do we create an environment where that's likely to occur in communities? For that, I found a study called From Chance to Serendipity, Knowledge Workers' Experiences of Serendipitous Social Encounters, a number of authors that you can see up there. And so what they did is both of these studies are based on lots of interviews and of people who have experienced serendipity and trying to suss out what were the elements that go into it. And so they ran this study and they have these elements, which I will explain in a more visual way in a moment. But basically all these elements, and then they mapped them out as likely to cause serendipity to occur and less likely, all right? And so what they found was that for serendipity to occur, you need people to be not too busy, right? They have to be present, focused. They have to have lots of energy. So standing ovations helps with that, right? There's a science behind this, it turns out. We weren't just making it up. They have to share common interests. That one was kind of obvious for us in community. They have to have similar personalities. It's pretty interesting. Like, I don't know how we organize community around personalities. Maybe like certain interests attract people, like the people who are going to karaoke tonight probably have somewhat similar personalities, at least that they like karaoke. And are in unfamiliar places. So this is interesting too, right? Because so much of our work in building community is making it feel like a home and comfortable and safe, but actually serendipity occurs more likely when you're in an unfamiliar place. So a lot of you who are here at CMX Summit for the first time, you have a higher likelihood of finding serendipity, perhaps. Are with unfamiliar people. Also interesting, right? Because like we do so much work to connect people and make them feel familiar with each other, but serendipity is like, I never expected to cross paths with this person, and yet we did. And having a high willingness to socialize, so they have to be like showing up with that intention to that space, and then are comfortable in social interactions. Also super interesting, right? Because people have all varying different levels of comfort in social interactions. And so how do you accommodate people who are less comfortable? How do you facilitate and create spaces that allow people to feel more comfortable and create more structure around things? And we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that in a moment. All right, so we have our process, and we have now the elements of what goes into a serendipitous environment. And so now the question for me was like, all right, well, how do we put this into practice for community building? How do we turn this into something we can actually apply? And for that, I developed the 5 levers of serendipity. This is just based more on my experience and my research in communities more broadly, tying it back to the research that we just reviewed. And so I found that there are 5 levers that you can use. Number 1 is immersion. So this is a really good example of immersion, right? So much of our communities today are real passive, right? You're in a Slack group, you're in a Facebook group, you're on social media, it's real passive, and you have like very brief interactions. And the reason an event like this is so powerful is because everyone here is immersed in it. You're not at home. You're not with your kids and your families. You are often staying in the same hotel as each other. You're in this space for 2 or 3 days together. You're going to run into each other in this room and then out in the hallway and then at the after party, and then you're going to get breakfast together and you're going to see people over and over again. And so it's just like packing lots and lots of those triggers into one immersive experience. And so that can be a conference like this. It could be like deeper cohort-based courses online. You can do immersive experiences online. I do think it's harder. There are no hallways. There's all the extracurricular stuff is where the really serendipitous stuff happens. But the more you immerse people into a shared experience where they're really present, they're not busy, they're very focused on it, that's going to create an opportunity for serendipity to occur. I was supposed to show you that picture the whole time I was talking. All right, next one is variation. So, we bring our community members together. So how can you think about providing them with a variety of different people and different topics and different experiences to have, right? Because that increases the likelihood that they'll come across unexpected people and unexpected topics and unexpected places. And so a couple good examples that we had in the CMX community, two of my most successful posts ever in the CMX community were our local connection thread where everybody would just post where they live, and we started threads for each city. We had 456 people participate in that. It was like wildly successful. And then same idea, but for platforms where community members could say, here's a platform I use, and you could connect with other people around the platforms. And so like these are just two quick examples where you figure out like what is a aspect of their identity or an interest that they have how do we create an experience just around that and create this variety of different ways for our members to participate and raise their hand to say, oh yeah, I share that identity or I also have that interest, right? And we do things like that here. We have the discussion groups at the event. We've done birds of feather tables in the past. It's all these ways of just giving people a variety of different ways to come together. All right, so we have immersion, variation, facilitation. This is my zucchini. So here's a story behind the zucchini. So I started a garden for the first time this year. I started gardening because that's what you do when you move to the suburbs. And you on sabbatical. and so one of my plants was a zucchini plant, and it was huge. It was like the biggest plant in the entire garden. It like killed my squash. It like took over the whole garden. But it wasn't producing any fruit. So like most frustrating plant ever. And so I was like Googling and trying to research like why isn't my zucchini plant producing? And I found that what you can do is you can manually fertilize the flowers by taking the male flower and putting in the female flower. And that's how you can actually make it happen, right? Like one of the reasons it might not be happening is they're just not getting fertilized, right? By the bees and animals that can fertilize the plant. And so I did that, and boom, I got my one zucchini of the summer. Isn't it beautiful? My son behind there ate the shit out of it. And so I just thought it's a really good analogy for community and how, of course I have to make a gardening analogy, I know, but how like a lot of the time we build community and we just kind of like hope that serendipity occurs. We hope that connections just happen. But I think facilitation is such an important part of how we build community. You can make things happen. Don't wait for it to happen. Facilitate, right? Like tell people what to do. Create new rules in your space that increase the likelihood of people interacting in the way you want to, right? It could be like, we're not going to do business cards here, or we're not going to talk about work. We're only going to talk about personal life. Like whatever the rules are, you can facilitate to make the kinds of serendipity and connections happen that may or may not happen organically. And we're going to practice that together soon. All right, number 4, pollination, a little bit of a theme here. And so another thing I realized is that a lot of serendipity happens outside of our community. Right? So we have people in our forums and our message boards and in our events, but serendipity sometimes feels the biggest when we run into people and we have these connections in spaces where we did not expect to see them at all, on the street, on the train station, at the grocery store, right? And so I think about how do you make it more likely that that kind of pollination out in the wild happens for your community. And so, swag is a really good example of this. And so if you saw someone on the street with a zucchini t-shirt that says Engineer Serendipity on it, you would know that they came to this talk or that they're part of this community, right? And I think, so like communities get this wrong a lot. Businesses get this along where they think that swag is about promoting their logo, their brand. It's like a billboard. I don't think that actually matters. It can work, but what it really does is it communicates to other people who see that logo, that image, that they're part of the same community. So even though this doesn't say CMX on it or my name or anything like that, if you both were walking down the street and saw this weird shirt, you would connect. You'd be like, oh shit, you were at that talk. And so thinking about like what are the symbols that you can create that people will recognize each other by out in the world, right? And we see this used in some of the oldest communities in the world, like religions and military and like the uniforms that people wear. There's these symbols that, I wear my chai every day. This was from my Saba, from my grandpa. I've worn it every day of my life. And so like anytime a Jew sees me with this, they're like, oh, part of the tribe. So like, right, it's like a symbol, right, that we're part of this community. And you could do it online as well. Like you see people put the community title in their bio. Like On Deck had that a lot, right? Like ODF, their number of their batch, and they put that in their bio. So it's a way of identifying each other online and offline. And then the fifth one is repetition. So, and this is one that was interesting and didn't come up in the two studies that I shared earlier, but I think it's so important to introduce repetition into your community, right? And so like, I'll give you an example. So I moved to New York about a year ago and I have no friends. And so I've been like on the hunt to like meet other parents, meet other dads. And so I would go to like the playground, I try to like give the other dad the eyes, and strike up a conversation, see if I get some numbers. And I didn't have a lot of success at first, but it was through repetition that slowly I started to have success, because what would happen is I'd see someone at the playground, but then I would see them again at the library, and then I'd see them again at the local concert. And it's through that repetition of seeing that person over and over again, even if we don't interact, but we see each other, it makes it more and more likely that we are willing to take that follow-up, that third step, to say like, hey, like, didn't I see you at the playground the other day? And he's like, yeah, and then we like get a beer and we're buddies, and that's what I'm dreaming up. I'm putting it in the universe. Right? So we need this repetition, right? And it goes back to that immersion, right? You can have a lot of repetition in an event like this, but if you're just in an online community, you might cross paths with one person every like month or so, right? So it's not getting frequent repetition. And there's some really cool examples of communities that do this. This is one of my favorites. Trends VC is a community, and they do daily stand-ups. So members can come and just post online, what did you accomplish yesterday and what will you do today? And they do it every day. And so it just creates this daily check-in between all the members to interact, to support each other, to have that kind of repetition. They're really smart too. They reward members with more community, which if you're thinking about gamification, just as an aside, so it's like if you have it was like a 25-day streak of doing check-ins, you unlock masterminds in the community. And then if you get to 50, you unlock a course. And so I love the idea of rewarding community activity with more community. It's genius. And so you could do this, we already do, this is the thing, like we're already doing a lot of this stuff, but I just find it really helpful to have in the context of serendipity. So if you're doing monthly meetups, you're doing book clubs, you have any sort of weekly rituals, you can start thinking about it as like, yeah, what I'm doing is having this repetition. Even if you have 3-4 people show up to your event, but it's the same people over and over again, you're creating that repetition that is increasing the odds that they're gonna have that spark, that positive outcome, and they're gonna look back and think, wow, that's where I found this person, this connection through this community. All right, so let's review. We have our serendipity process, trigger, connection, follow-up, valuable outcome, and our unexpected threat. We have the serendipitous environment. People aren't too busy. They have lots of energy, common interests, similar personalities, unfamiliar places with unfamiliar people, have a high willingness to socialize, and are comfortable in social interactions. And we have the 5 levers: immersion, variation, facilitation, pollination, and repetition. All right. Should we do this? Should we see if we could do it live? All right, I've never done this before, so this is gonna be an experiment. But you probably all noticed that there are name tags and markers on your seats. There's not enough markers for everyone, so it's like should be 1 for every 2 people. So just how serendipitous. Good one. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna run through this exercise, and then we're gonna try it live. But my hope is that by participating in this exercise, we can increase the likelihood of serendipity occurring for each one of you over the course of the next 2 days at this event by like, let's say 10%. and which is a brilliant number because there's no way we can measure it, so you all know what I'm talking about, right? So, okay, so we're gonna give this a shot. So what we're gonna do is first, you're gonna write on your name tags just one thing that's been bringing you joy in your life. It could be a book you've been reading, a TV show you watched, something positive at work that you're looking forward to, an idea you've had, your kids, something just positive, something joyful in your life that you'd like to wear on your body for the rest of the event. All right, so take a moment, write it down on your name tag, and then you're also gonna write one thing that you've been stuck on or challenged by. We're at a professional event, so I'd probably recommend keeping it more professional, but like anything that you've really been struggling with or dealing with that you also would like to be able to have conversations around and talk about. All right, so think about that, write it down, and then share the marker with the next person. There's also like extra name tags, so feel free to grab those to give them to people who didn't make it to this talk, or use them tomorrow if you want to renew it and refresh. All right. I should have said this earlier. You don't have to write the whole thing, like 1-2 words. Sorry. I really needed to give you that instruction. Yeah, like the point is just to have the word so someone can ask you and then you explain it. Don't write like an entire sentence on your name tag. So, there are more name tags if you need to redo it after this. I told you this is the first time we're doing this. It's practice. All right. Everyone have a chance to write it down? No? Yeah? Raise your hand if you need another minute. Okay, just a few. All right. All right, well, take a minute, and what we're going to do next is we're going to prime your mindset. All right? So what I'm going to ask you to do is to make 3 commitments that I want you to bring into this exercise, and then to also bring into the rest of the event that I believe will increase the likelihood that you will experience serendipity. Does that sound good? Yeah. You in? Yes. All right. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. Just don't say it. But all right. So repeat after me. I will talk to strangers. Good job. All right? Unfamiliar people. Step 1. Number 2, I will lead with curiosity. All right, so when we have these discussions, I'm not saying you have to solve the problem for someone. I'm not saying you have to, solve their challenge, but just have conversations, lead with curiosity, ask lots of questions, help them think through it themselves, right? As a community, we can just hold space for each other, be present, have these conversations, ask lots of questions, and maybe help them arrive at a conclusion that they already had inside them, right? You don't need the solutions, just lead with curiosity. And number 3, I will follow up. You better. You better. Pull out the phone afterward. One thing I like to do is I don't wait till after to email someone I met. I just send it right on the spot. Now it's in the inbox. We can follow up again later. But just when you feel a connection, when you feel like there's something to pursue there, just follow up. Worst case scenario, nothing happens, but maybe there's some serendipity to be had there. Okay, so we've primed our mindset. We are ready to interact. We're ready to be social, right? We feel comfortable with socialization, maybe a little bit. Yeah. All right, we'll give it a shot. All right, so find an unfamiliar person and just say, tell me about your 2 things. We're going to practice. And what you're going to do, you're each going to get 3 minutes, and I will tell you when to switch to the second person. I'll give you that structure, okay? So choose a person. One person share their 2 things, ask questions, lead with curiosity, and after 3 minutes, I'll have you switch. All right. Raise your hand if you just found some serendipity. Oh, that's very good. That's pretty fast. We have, you live in Brazil and you're planning trips in Brazil. Anyone else have a really cool connection that already occurred?
We met each other 20 years ago.
You met each other 20 years ago. I love it.
And they're Brazilians too.
They're both Brazilian. Oh my God. Brazilians find each other. You do. One more, anyone else?
Yeah. My grandma's
You have the same, you have the same name as his grandma. What are the odds? Hey, hey. I love it. That's a great connection. Great connection. Make sure to follow up on that. Any others? Last chance?
We've been friends with our friends since we were very little.
You were friends with,
With our friends.
you both have close friends that you've been close with since you were really, really little? That's cool. I love that. Yeah, that's awesome. So like already, just in that moment, we find these random connections by talking to someone unexpected with the right structure, with the right framework. And so wear those name tags for the rest of today at least. Just do me that like one day. If you want to wear it again tomorrow, great. But when you meet people, now instead of just being like, what do? You could say like, tell me about your two things. And it's something else to talk about, some other way to find those triggers and find those connections. I'm going to leave you with one last story. There was a point where I almost left the community industry altogether. It was the lowest point in my entire career. I got fired from my first real job building community, and I had like all of my ego and identity in this job. Got fired, and I remember the moment it happened, like vividly. I was in the room, and I remember the CMO, my boss, looking at me and saying, we're going to part ways. I remember my hands shaking, my palms sweating, and I just got like tunnel vision. I was like, I just have to get out of this building, get out of the elevators here in San Francisco. I was like, I have to just get to the water. There was a pier that I used to like to take walks to. I was like, I just have to get to this pier. And so I walked straight to the elevator, got out of the building, started walking down the street towards the water in a daze, and I hear, Spinks! I was like, oh no, fuck, who just saw me? And it was my friend, Thomas Knoll, who some of you may know. He's been a community OG, one of the most thoughtful, just kind people I've ever known. And he looks at me, he's like, oh, what's going on? And I was like, I just got fired. And he was like, oh shit, like, are you okay? He gave me a hug, and he's like, let's get dinner in a week and just talk. And so he's like, I'll let you walk. So I kept walking. And we got dinner. I got to the water, depressed, called my dad, cried a lot. We got dinner again in a week, and there was nothing that came out of that necessarily. We just caught up, and he kind of gave me advice, and we just talked about what I might do or not do. And then I was just depressed for like 3 months. I just got moved out to San Francisco by this company a month before. I didn't know anybody. I found an apartment on Craigslist, and my roommates there were like, who the hell did we allow into this apartment? He just like watches TV all day, eats snacks. And I was just horribly depressed. I lost all my confidence in myself and my ability to do this work. And then it was a few months later that Thomas emailed me. And he said, hey, David, I'm stepping down from my role. He was working at a company called Le Web. And it was the biggest tech conference in Europe. He ran community there. And he's like, I'm stepping down. I'd like to introduce you to Loic Lemire, who runs this conference. And I think you should take my position. And I was like, I don't know, I don't have a lot of confidence. So just come meet him. So I met with him and Loic, and chat went great. Loic was like, great, let's try it. We'll do like a 6-month contract to do our next conference in Paris. And so I did it. I just kind of took the leap. I was like, whatever, it's money. I needed money. And 2 weeks after I started working with Loic, one day he emailed me and he just said, David, you're the best community builder I've ever worked with. And that was like the moment that I regained confidence in myself, and that led me down the path that I'm still on today, continue working in community, end up building CMX with an amazing team. And I think about that as well in Serendipity, like the odds of running into Thomas in that moment on the street. If I left the building, if the elevator took an extra 30 seconds, we wouldn't have crossed the street at the same time. And so I just want to leave you with this message that when you're at your lowest, and I know a lot of people are struggling in this industry right now, it's not an easy time to be in the community industry, but when you're in your lowest, your expectations are also really low. And turns out that that's exactly the kind of environment where serendipity thrives. So if you are feeling like you're at a low point in any way in your life or your career, just stay open, because that's where serendipity shows up. I'm David Spinks. You can find me at davidspinks.com.